Hello and welcome to my channel. Rhino here. Today, we're looking at the second part of the Skeptic's journey from the Christianity Engaged channel. To recap, this is the totally true story of the totally real skeptic who started out as an atheist but then found his way into Christianity. But we won't name him and he'll be played by an actor because he wants to remain anonymous. Now, I'm sure there's a nugget of truth somewhere deep down in the story, but I am highly skeptical of most of it because of how many times I've seen people that were raised in the church give a testimony about how they were a hardened skeptic until they accepted Christ at age 7 in the church they'd been attending their whole lives. A lot of Christians see their first time answering an altar call as the moment that they accepted Jesus, and then recast their whole lives before that moment as being their atheist phase. I'm not saying this is exactly what's going on here, but I am definitely skeptical of their supposed skepticism. So let's go! But first, this is the last Friday that I have to talk about Project Share. As of this recording, we're sitting at $4,750 donated to Project Share out of my $15,000 goal. We still have a long way to go and not a lot of time to get there. I know that statistically speaking, this year has been really difficult for you financially, and Project Share services are that much more important for those same reasons, which is why if you are one of the fortunate ones who actually has a little bit of disposable income, giving to charities like Project Share is critical this year. So if you can, please consider helping. But as always, make sure that you take care of yourself first. I am sure that a food bank would not want people to go hungry because they decided to give their grocery money to the food bank. And of course, Project Share is more than just a food bank. They help run a homeless shelter, they help people find jobs, they have financial assistance for people who are late on their bills, and so much more. So if you can give, please do so by going to donate.vicerhino.com or by clicking the link in the video description. Now, on to the video.
God is a delusion, a fictional character invented to explain our existence before science could. We simply don't need God to explain our universe anymore.
That's a bit of a mischaracterization. I don't think we ever needed God to explain our universe. I also don't think that belief in God is a delusion. One of the defining characteristics of a delusion is that a delusional belief is not one that fits in with the culture. And as most people believe in God in one way or another, to say that God belief is part of the culture is pretty non-controversial.
Science has all the answers we need.
No, it's not that science has all the answers. Science isn't some guy that you go to for answers to your pressing questions. Science is a process. And it is so far the best process that we have come up with for reliably learning about reality. And we have not learned everything there is to learn yet. Hence why science still exists. If science had all the answers, there wouldn't be scientists doing research to figure out more answers. Now that said, over the course of human history, natural explanations discovered through the scientific method have consistently replaced supernatural explanations provided by various religions. And for many people, this consistent pattern is enough to conclude that the supernatural explanations are, at best, unhelpful. At worst, you get things like resistance to the theory of evolution, which is actively hindering scientific progress. So, yeah, science may not have all the answers, but it has reliably provided us with enough answers so far that it is reasonable to trust that it will continue to do so for the foreseeable future.
Most of us know that science provides a theory for the original creation of the universe that doesn't involve God.
That phrasing is one of the tells that leads me to believe that their skeptic wasn't really a skeptic in the way that they're presenting it. I feel like the person that they're trying to make you believe this person wouldn't phrase it that way. Someone who doesn't believe in God or supernatural creators is very unlikely to refer to the origin of the universe as the creation of the universe. That is an apologetics move, where they sneak loaded language into the discussion in order to make the conclusion of a creator more palatable. Those silly skeptics think it's possible to have a creation without a creator. Isn't that ridiculous? Well, yeah, it is. Which is why those of us who don't believe in a creator are very unlikely to call the universe a creation.
I firmly stand in the science camp. Though, to be honest, I don't fully understand all the details about this current theory. So as part of my journey, I decided to research this scientific theory.
And unless you can explain all the complex math that you find in the papers dealing with cosmology, I'm not going to take that statement seriously. No, don't get me wrong, I don't understand that shit either, but don't conflate Googling with doing research. What I do on this channel is Googling. I don't research shit. which is why I've said several times in several videos over the years that you should not trust me as a source of information. I do my best to accurately communicate what I learn, but at the end of the day, I am just some idiot on the internet who sometimes stumbles onto the correct interpretation of a paper that I don't actually fully comprehend. But that's not research, at least not in the academic sense.
So I can better understand my own position and explain it to others when asked.
Most people who are not in the field of cosmology are never asked to explain their position about the origin of the universe, so it's just weird that that's a thing you feel the need to prepare for. Doing this right now is my job, and I don't think I have ever been asked about my position on the origin of the universe. Not directly at any rate. Plenty of apologists have asked about it in their videos, but nobody has ever asked me specifically to explain my position on it, and I feel like I am far more likely to encounter that question than your average street skeptic.
Maybe you're in the same boat. I turned to a very reliable source of material, Wikipedia.
You say that like it's supposed to be a joke, but my understanding is that it has been well established at this point that Wikipedia is actually quite reliable. Yeah, when I was in high school, we weren't allowed to cite it, but I have very rarely come across anything on Wikipedia that is just flat out wrong. And the few times when I have, it's usually a biographical detail about someone's life, not a scientific fact about reality. But yeah, Wikipedia does say that evolution is a real thing that happened, so I can understand why this creationist organization wouldn't trust them. Also, this statement gives us a telling bit of information that we can use to find out later on in the series that this story is just completely made up. So remember this for part 7, I guess. I hope I remember it for part 7, because that would be funny if I made this little prediction and then didn't remember.
I found exactly what I needed under Timeline of Cosmological Theories, a list of all the major discoveries and theories about the creation of the universe. And it was in chronological order too, so all I had to do was look at the last theory that all the scientists agreed on.
Unlike what he's presenting here, the timeline is not just a list of the various hypotheses about the origin of the universe presented in chronological order. That is a part of it, but as it gets closer to the present, it gets more granular. Rather than broad, sweeping ideas about the cosmos as a whole, it gets into small discoveries that don't necessarily shake up the overall picture, but rather help bring it into focus. For instance, the 1830s was the first time that stellar parallax was measured, marking the first time anyone had measured the distance of an object outside the solar system. That is a very important milestone in our understanding of the cosmos, to be sure, but it is not in and of itself a cosmological model. And while the list is in chronological order, it's not as simple as just scrolling to the last entry and assuming that that's the one that's backed by the scientific consensus to the exclusion of all others. After all, Newton's laws are mentioned in the first half of the article, and I very much doubt you'll find any scientist alive today who doesn't accept Newton's laws. And what's more, the most recent entry on the list as of this recording is that, in 2023, astrophysicists questioned the overall current view of the universe in the form of the Standard Model of Cosmology based on the latest James Webb Space Telescope studies. While not technically untrue, this is where Wikipedia can fail. That presentation is based on sensationalized headlines. Essentially, the JWST found galaxies that are bigger than they should have been, given how old they are. This doesn't actually call the overall validity of the lambda CDM cosmological model into question, which is the current model of Big Bang cosmology with the most agreement among cosmologists, and is commonly referred to as the standard model, but it does call into question our understanding of the aspects of that model to do with galaxy formation in the early stages of the universe. Currently, large galaxies are believed to have first formed by aggregating smaller galaxies, and galaxies of the size discovered by the JWST are not supposed to exist that soon after the Big Bang. There are a few hypotheses that could explain this without abandoning our current understanding. It could be that those particular galaxies happen to be at their peak of stellar formation when we observe them, leading to a higher than expected brightness. They could be bright because stellar winds have cleaned out a lot of the dust around them, making them appear to be brighter without being bigger. And it could be that we just so happen to look at a patch of sky that had a handful of anomalously large galaxies, but that will not turn out to be the norm when other patches of sky are observed. If any of those explanations turns out to be true, then we don't actually need much of an overhaul of our current understanding. And as it happens, follow-up spectroscopy revealed that most of these objects have active galactic nuclei, which boosts the galaxy's brightness and causes the masses to be overestimated, which just so happens to be a direct quote from the Wikipedia page on the lambda CDM model. I stand by my assessment that Wikipedia is generally reliable, but you still have to engage in critical thinking when reading it. Actually, scratch that. You have to engage in critical thinking when reading anything. Wikipedia just so happens to be the thing that we are currently discussing.
Well, as you may have guessed, this is where things got a bit difficult. No single theory is widely accepted by all scientists.
Well, the standard model is pretty widely accepted. hence the label, standard model. But remember, a scientific theory is a broad explanation for several observed phenomena, and a theory is tested by making predictions. And it just so happens that if you do a search for either standard model or lambda CDM on the Timeline of Cosmological Theories page, you'll find that there are several entries that talk about how various observations are consistent with the standard model. That is, they fit with predictions that are made by that model. But the thing is, the actual origin of the universe pre-Big Bang is such a difficult thing to study that we have to work with models that use math to describe our observations. And the problem here is that there are overlapping predictions in the various cosmological models. Every model that is still under consideration today will have to match the predictions made by relativity, for example. So while there is not universal agreement about exactly which cosmological model is actually the correct one, there are some pretty big points of agreement among all cosmologists. The universe is about 13.7 billion years old, relativity works, the Big Bang happened, stuff like that. In fact, if we go back to the Lambda CDM model's Wikipedia page, we'll see a statement about how, despite its widespread acceptance because of how accurately it predicts a bunch of stuff about the universe, cosmologists believe that it may be an approximation of a more fundamental model, like how Newtonian gravity is an approximation of gravity as described by relativity. And this is not a problem for science. Remember, science is just a method by which we learn about reality. The fact that there are unknowns is what makes science possible. If you find a wide disagreement among experts in a particular field, then congratulations! You found an area of active research where big discoveries can still be made. That is exciting, wouldn't you say? I mean, I guess you can just give up and shove God into that knowledge gap, but we aren't going to learn more about the universe with that kind of an attitude.
And in fact, these theories changed more than the latest fashion trends.
They change to accommodate new data and observations. That is a good thing. That's how science works. If it never changed, then we'd never have learned how to make tools or build houses, and I rather like living in a house, thank you very much.
In fact, at the time of this video, there are 93 discoveries or theories listed over the centuries. From the 16th century BC to 1899, there were 33 discoveries, roughly one every 108 years.
I would really like to know what the inclusion criteria were for this list of 33 discoveries, because there are currently 65 items on the list in between those years. In the more modern items on the list, it could be argued that this video is a few years old, so maybe they've added on to the list with new discoveries, but it'd be really weird for them to add 32 items to the list from the 19th century and before. It's not like Johannes Kepler is still out there making new discoveries that get added during his lifetime. Now, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of the things on that list are not actually cosmological models, but they are discoveries that advance our understanding of cosmology. So maybe they only counted the actual cosmological models, right? Wrong. In the 9th century, we have observations of galaxies other than the Milky Way. In the 13th century, we've got evidence for Earth's axial rotation. We've got Newton describing his laws of motion in the 1600s. Why are those considered discoveries worth counting, but not, say, the first approximation of the speed of light being calculated using the orbital mechanics of Jupiter's moons in 1675? And if we do just want to look at cosmological models rather than discoveries that contributed to them, why not include things like the Jewish Talmud giving an argument for a finite universe in the 5th century, along with an explanation? It just seems rather arbitrary, so I would like to know how you guys decided to include the items that you did and exclude the ones that you didn't.
But from 1900 to 2016, there were 78 theories, roughly one every 1.9 years.
I counted 74. That's close enough to 78 that I'll assume that either I undercounted or you guys overcounted, or some combination of the two. Point is, you exclude half of the entries from before the 1900s for what appear to be completely arbitrary reasons, but then you include nearly everything since 1900? I will also note your looseness with the terminology. You've been popping back and forth between calling these discoveries and theories. Discovery and theory are not synonyms. Discoveries are part of theories, and theories contain multiple discoveries. Also worth mentioning is that the 2016 discovery that you stopped at was the direct detection of gravitational waves, which was a confirmation of predictions made by the theory of relativity. Relativity was also on the list. It was first published in 1915. Are you counting the theory of relativity as one theory, and then a discovery that confirmed relativity as a different theory? Why would you do that? I'll tell you one thing, if this skeptic story is actually true, he wasn't a very good skeptic. Also, to add on to my thing about how we know this isn't really a true story, keep the year 2016 in mind. It's curious that they stopped there.
That's a lot of change.
Yes, it is. Are you suggesting that this rate of change means that the modern cosmologists are less likely to be correct than, say, the cosmologists of the 1500s who were still arguing over whether the Earth or the Sun were the center of the solar system and or universe? But also, our scientific understanding of things started progressing rapidly around the same time as the scientific method was formalized. This is not evidence against the things that we have discovered using science. Rather, this is more supporting evidence for the idea that the scientific method is the best way to learn about reality. And this is not constrained to cosmology. Everything from agriculture, geology, physics, computer science, aviation, and whatever other field of science or technology you care to think of went through a similar pattern of very, very slow progress before the 19th and 20th centuries, followed by whiplash-inducing amounts of progress since then. Historically speaking, it really wasn't all that long ago that a doctor would drain your blood in order to balance your humors if you were sick, just like they would in ancient Greece. But today, we're seeing clinical trials of eye implants that restore the vision of people with age-related macular degeneration. That is a culmination of rapid technological advancement in several different and completely independent fields of research. But are you really going to tell the people in the trial that no, they actually couldn't see because the science was changing too rapidly, so the scientists clearly have no idea what they're on about? Obviously not.
And as I mentioned before, no single theory is widely accepted by all scientists.
Well, just as one example, the theory of relativity is on your list, and I don't know of a single scientist who doesn't accept that one.
Believe it or not, this was not the most disappointing news of all.
No, I believe it. But I believe it because it's not even a little bit disappointing. If anything, it's exciting. Yay! We get to make new discoveries because there's still shit we don't know.
Recent discoveries show that all the stars, all the planets, all of the galaxies, all the matter only make up about 4% of the entire known universe.
So if we look at this list that he says has too many items showing that scientists don't agree on shit, the proposal that the universe is dominated by dark matter happened in 1982. Its first mention was in 1933. Evidence that there were substantial amounts of it showed up in 1970. Simulations show that cold dark matter matches our observations about reality while hot dark matter does not. And in 2005, the baryon acoustic oscillation feature in the galaxy distribution was detected, which was the confirmation of a prediction of the cold dark matter models. According to what you said right before this, not a single item on the list is widely accepted by cosmologists. So there you go. If we use your logic, dark matter isn't a problem for cosmology because cosmologists don't widely accept anything about it. It's interesting just how quickly all this stuff falls apart if you actually pay attention to what they're saying. I guess I wasn't supposed to go look at the list for myself. I was just supposed to trust that they weren't lying about it.
Seriously. Everything that we can see in the observable universe extending to the deepest galaxy in space only makes up about 4% of the entire known universe. The remaining 96% is made up of dark matter and dark energy. And by their own admission, scientists have no idea what it is or how to study it because it can't be seen, touched, or interacted with.
To quote the Harvard and Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, quote, "Scientists study dark matter and dark energy in multiple ways." Now, sure, there is a lot that we don't know about dark matter and dark energy, but do you know how we learn about them? The scientific method. The modern concept of the atom was developed in the early 1800s and refined throughout the 1800s, but it wasn't until the early to mid-1900s that the modern quantum mechanical model of the atom took shape, and it wasn't until 1955 that we first directly observed an individual atom. The scientists working throughout the 1800s had a lot of misconceptions about atoms and didn't have the equipment necessary to properly study them, but they kept at it, and now we have a pretty good understanding of atomic theory. Turns out, the way you make scientific progress is by not stuffing God into the scientific unknowns. Who knew?
And yet they know it exists because of its gravitational effects.
You just said it can't be interacted with. Gravitational effects are interactions.
As you might imagine, I'm having a hard time grasping this concept. How can we be sure of anything if everything we know is based on such an extremely limited subset of the entire universe?
Results. You can't argue with results. Many of these discoveries have real-world applications that you make use of every day. Us not knowing exactly what dark matter is doesn't mean that we can't compensate for relativistic effects in GPS satellites.
4% to be exact.
Oh, I misunderstood. Sorry. I thought he was going for that whole, this circle represents all the knowledge it's possible to have about the universe, and that little dot represents all the knowledge that we do have thing, rather than the only 4% of the universe is baryonic matter, therefore we can never learn about the other 96% of the universe, which isn't true, but even if it were, so what? There's still lots that we do know about that 4%, and there's still lots to learn about that 4%.
I thought science would have an ironclad explanation for me.
Well, then you don't understand how science works, because, to repeat myself by echoing this reiteration, science is all about learning new shit. If we already knew all the shit, there'd be no new shit to learn, so science wouldn't be a thing that we'd do.
Unfortunately, I had to conclude that science does not have a single strong answer for the creation and understanding of our universe.
Why would you expect such a complicated and massive topic to have a single simple answer? I mean, assuming this is actually a skeptic speaking, I know why a Christian apologist would think that. God did it is quite a simple answer to that whole thing after all. Unfortunately, it's an answer without substance. It doesn't actually explain anything about the universe. It doesn't help us progress in our knowledge or technology or anything. If anything, it hinders such progress. So yeah, another point in the this isn't a real story bucket.
And in my opinion, has actually taken a step backward with the apparent discovery of dark matter and dark energy.
Why would a new discovery set us back? Is it because a part of that discovery was that we have a lot more to learn than we initially thought? Because that doesn't actually set us back. That just expands our future potential, which, if anything, is pretty damn awesome.
In summary, here's what I know. Scientists don't all agree on a single theory for the creation of the universe.
Scientists do largely agree on the majority of the details regarding the origin of the universe, at least the details that come after the Big Bang. Before the Big Bang is still largely up for grabs, but yeah, basically everything from the Big Bang forward has a pretty broad consensus.
Even if they did, the theory is changing every 2 years.
Heaven forbid we make progress in our understanding.
Over the course of my lifetime, I can expect the explanation for the origin of the universe to change nearly 40 times.
Again, keep in mind, the items that he's counting as the theories changing are usually new discoveries that confirm predictions made by a previous theory, usually either relativity or the standard model of Big Bang cosmology. They're presenting this as though the accepted model is completely upended and we start from scratch every 2 years, but that's not even close to an accurate picture of the study of cosmology.
Finally, the discovery of dark matter and dark energy reveals that the more we learn about our universe, the more we realize just how little we know.
Which is super fucking awesome. I mean, who knows what sort of cool shit we'll be able to learn in the future?
Less than 4%. It is extremely humbling.
As it should be. Science works better when we don't assume we already have all the answers.
So, what do I do now? Concede to a universe created by God?
Why? Why would learning that we have a lot to learn still automatically make God a reasonable assumption here?
Not a chance. This was disappointing. But I'm sure it was discouraging to a lot of scientists at first as well.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of scientists whose entire careers involve them hoping to make a groundbreaking discovery of some kind were disappointed by the idea that there are still lots of groundbreaking discoveries to be made. See, this is why I don't believe that this story is actually true. I don't think that an actual skeptic would, of their own accord, land on apologetics talking points if they were actually trying to understand the scientific view of cosmology. If we pretend that this story is actually real, the most generous interpretation is that this skeptic didn't think to actually read any of the entries on the list that he talked about, and just assumed that each point was a completely new and independent entry, thus allowing for his silly tallying of changing cosmological theories.
And then challenge them to push the boundaries of our understanding. Science just needs more time.
Science will always need more time, because that's how learning things works. It takes time. This would be like looking at a first grade class and complaining that they don't know calculus, so calculus must not be real. What do you mean it'll take time to teach them everything they need to know in order to learn calculus? You're just using time as an excuse.
In the meantime, I guess I'm going to take a look into the other side of the debate and explore some of the irrational theories provided by the Bible and other religions.
Well, I've said it before, and I'll probably say it again before the series is over. The way that everything this guy says is worded in exactly the same way as they would be if it was an apologist making up things for a hypothetical atheist straw man to say, makes it really hard to believe that this isn't just an apologist making up things for a hypothetical atheist straw man to say.
Perhaps like this skeptic, you believe science has all the answers.
And if you believe science has all the answers, then you have a fundamental misunderstanding of what science even is.
Maybe you've been persuaded over the years to believe that science has disproven the Bible.
Science has disproven aspects of certain interpretations of the Bible, yes. If you insist on interpreting Genesis literally, for instance, then science has disproven your interpretation, because we know that evolution happened. We know Noah's flood did not happen. We know that the story of the Tower of Babel is not how different languages happened. But there are plenty of Christians out there with a more nuanced approach to scripture, and while I still obviously don't agree with their interpretations, it is much harder to say that science disproved the Bible to people who don't look for science in the Bible to begin with.
Or the existence of God.
Science can't prove that God does not exist. because God is not a testable claim. Now, that said, there is a lot of science that has been done that we would expect to have different outcomes if God were real. For instance, one study on the effect of prayer on patients recovering from cardiac bypass surgery split patients into 4 categories: those who were being prayed for and were uncertain if they were being prayed for, those who were not being prayed for and were uncertain if they were being prayed for, those who were being prayed for and knew it, and those who were not being prayed for and knew it. There were no major differences between any of the groups. But there was one minor difference. The people who were being prayed for and knew about it were slightly more likely to experience complications during their recovery. If God were real, we wouldn't expect prayer to actually be slightly harmful. Unless that God is malicious, of course. That's it for this one. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Carissa Nomadic, who says, "Not just, but also there's the fact that evolution does not, no matter how advantageous it could potentially be, explicitly compel you to misdeed. Christianity literally tells you to do bad things, and those have to be overlooked purposefully." Indeed, as much as apologists will complain about how evolution leads to eugenics or whatever, there is nothing inherent to understanding the theory of evolution that concludes with you having to become a proponent of eugenics. But there is plenty of shit in the Bible that can be, and still is, used to justify heinous atrocities, bigotry, misogyny, and all sorts of bad behaviors, including becoming proponents of eugenics. So if we're determining the truth of a worldview based on which one has better outcomes, then evolution wins over Christianity. Of course, in reality, evolution and Christianity are not necessarily mutually exclusive, nor is evolution actually a worldview, but it's not like apologists will agree with that level of nuance, so there we go. Evolution wins the argument from consequences. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to go to donate.vicerhino.com or click the link in the description to help Project Share out. I'll be back next Friday with more, but if you need to get your Rhino fix in before then, I live stream with Cirrus every Wednesday at 8:30 Eastern on my other channel, The Watering Hole. Thanks to Piper for being my editor, and special thanks as always to my patrons, who are the discovery that gets counted as a cosmological model by the fake skeptic that is my channel. If you'd like to actually just be a bit of supporting evidence for the standard model, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/vicerhino, or by supporting the channel in one of the other methods that can be found at links.vicerhino.com, which is also where you'll find links to my other projects. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my PO box address is in the description. See you next time. And as it happens, follow up spectroscopy. And as it happens, follow up